Welcome back to the third day of this year's Next Generation 8.5 Digital Edition or Special Edition. And we will face a tough program today as yesterday and the day before. But let me take the opportunity to thank all students and teachers for their participation in the organization and realization of this special edition of Next Generation. And I'm looking forward not only to the works of the students, but also to exciting panel discussions like this last one, which is called Technological Dynamics. What strategies do universities employ to establish aesthetic continuity against the backdrop of technological disruptions? Enjoy. Welcome to Next Generation 8.5 or Net Generation, the digital edition of this year's Next Generation, the pandemic edition we should call it. We are talking in panel 3 about technological dynamics. What strategies do universities employ to establish aesthetic continuity against the backdrop of technological disruption? We have the situation that on one hand we have new trends, new technologies coming up, like artificial intelligence in this moment. But it cannot be the case that every teacher becomes an expert in 1 year in several topics. This is the disruption aspect. But on the other hand, we have to preserve a continuation of aesthetics in the education. We have to establish historic knowledge. We have to establish so many things in the way how we deal with the education in the universities or music schools, that it seems to be a contradiction. On the one hand, a tough evolution of technology, and on the other hand, the continuity, especially with people, professors and teachers in schools of music. With me are talking together Claudia Jane Scroccaro. Now I have it, sorry. She's a composition student and teaching assistant of the Studio for Electronic Music at the Hochschule für Musik und Darstellende Künste Stuttgart. I don't know how it's called in English. And as well, welcome here in the round. As well with us is today.
Nice to see you.
Nice that you are here. As well with us is Rebecca Beauchamp, Master of Fine Art, ex-media studio sound, and she's part of the KHM, the School of Media in Cologne. Welcome, Rebecca. And with us again as well is Kirsten, Reese, head of the UNI.K Studio for Electroacoustic Composition, Sound Art and Sound Research at the UNI.K Berlin, University of the Arts, Berlin. Welcome, Kirsten. And last but not least, no, not last, but the pre-last is Professor Dr. Christoph Seibert. He's head of the Institute for Music, Informatics and Musicology at the School of Music in Karlsruhe. Welcome, Christoph Seibert. And finally, Professor Dr. Stefan Prins. He's director of the Hybrid Music Lab at the School of Music or University of Music, Karl Maria von Weber, Dresden. Welcome, Stefan Prins. So let's start and jump into the question. How would you address, we use the term disruption, but the discontinuity of topics of technical expertises, in which is especially heavy in the field of electroacoustic music or technological driven music?
Many thanks, Ludger, for this introduction. First of all, maybe I want a little bit to question the premise of aesthetic continuity. The way you pointed it out makes continuity for me quite clear, so that we have to certain that teaching goes on and that we deliver the stuff we have to deliver, things like that. But aesthetic continuity is something I have different associations with. I could think of, for example, historically informed practice of performance of pieces by Luigi Nono, for example, or pieces which include live electronics. We all might be familiar with getting a Maximus P patch for a certain piece we want to perform from earcam and then starting to debugging it and things like that to make it really working. So this is a problem, and this maybe is something about aesthetic continuity. Another point with regard to that could be interesting is like aspects of object-based audio, which come up to be independent from diffusion systems. So this could also be an aspect of aesthetic continuity, for example. But what I think for us, also working with art practice, which is more interesting, is something like a premise I would appreciate would be a relative aesthetic autonomy as against of music technology. So to be in relation to all these technologies as a natural process in creating art with technology, but from a perspective of a relative autonomy, as against to continuity, because every time things are changing. So that's the first starting point, for example.
Mm-hmm. Would you not think that we have certain rules let me express a different thing. When I studied in the 80s in the University of Music, the paradigms of electronic music were quite different than they are today. And I agree that there is a discontinuity there's evolution of evolution in aesthetic or in these paradigms, but we still, for example, would defend somehow Stockhausen as a person and within his value. So that's one aspect. We wouldn't say everything what Stockhausen said is invalid today. The opposite is true. So there is a certain continuity of history. And on the other side, we have, of course, different the new aesthetic waves or new aesthetic ideas, new aesthetic applications, the way what people do with our music. But can we change and make a shift? For example, put me as a person. If I'm teaching in the School of Music, I don't represent the generation today. So what shall I do?
I know I participated in the last panel discussion about this, and in hindsight, I feel that the answer to the kind of conundrum that we see ourselves in is actually quite simple, which is there's absolutely nothing wrong with maintaining kind of the old, like there's absolutely no need to kill our idols. For example, it's very important to like keep Stockhausen. But at the same time, it seems to me very much feasible that institutions, like schools, for example, can incorporate new people and styles and disciplines into their curricula. And I think when it comes down to brass tacks, that's simply about hiring like diverse voices who have the ability to speak to these kind of new forms and new paradigms.
Mm-hmm. And thank you, Rebecca. And Claudia, you want to say something, but you have to, unmute.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. I liked very much what you said. That I'm very in line with your idea about this, your position. And I would like also maybe to add something about it, that other than not killing our idols, basically the basic techniques that we're employing in electronic music have not changed. We're still using the same basic techniques, just in different probably combinations of it. I want just to say a word, or different controls of it, or different interactions with also the instrumental eventually part, if we have mixed music, or with media, if someone is interested in multimedia work. So I have the feeling that this discontinuity is more a local perception that we have, but in a broader, if we look at a broader history of also the softwares that have been around in the past 20, 30 years, there's not much discontinuity if we think of it. Maybe the strongest discontinuity we have experienced is the transition between the analog and digital. And probably before something like this might actually happen, I think it might take a while. So even though, I don't know, you feel like you don't represent the younger generation, you can provide them tools that will allow them to then somehow, be themselves in the present, but having also the strong reference, which is basically unchanged.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. I would like to piggyback on what Claudia just said. I very much agree with that. I very much agree. Well, first of all, also to get back to what Christoph said, the idea of continuity of aesthetics is something that, I don't know if I'm naive there, but that is totally not important for me in my teaching or in how I see my role as a teacher. Perhaps even the opposites. Somehow, I would find it quite problematic if all the students that come out of Dresden would have some kind of aesthetical continuity within them. If you would see that they are like these lines that everyone somehow sits on. I find it much more important actually that as a teacher, you can really try to understand what each student is interested in and is trying to do, and then develop that voice. And the more discontinuous it is, I think the better, the higher, or the more success we have had as a teacher, because that somehow proves that you're really listening to what a specific student wants to do rather than force some kind of aesthetics or vision upon him or her. So, and also when new technologies appear, and of course we can't follow and study and learn all the new technologies that are there. My approach to them also as a teacher is a little bit from that perspective. It's new for everyone. So I try to learn with the students at the same time. And I also think it's not a shame to admit that I don't really know how to program AI at this point. But I'm interested in it also. And luckily at Dresden, we have funding for experts, so to hire experts to give workshops and to give us some introductions. That's actually something really recent that will be the case for the next years. And I think that's a little bit how we will try to tackle that.
Okay, so you finished, Stefan? Yes, I think that everything that has been said, we seem to agree on many points. I think one thing that we have to bear in mind is that this so-called problem is a general problem that we have nowadays, and all our not accumulated knowledge, because it is so varied and so complex, and it is so accessible to, we know about so many developments in so many areas, and the question of how to deal with the canon has been one that has been also, discussed in other subjects and in other teaching relations. How do we deal with the fact that certain things that were always regarded as the reference works in a certain field are not known by a younger generation? What do we do do we agree on certain works, or do we give this idea up of having a common canon? So I think it's a general question. And the second thing is that I think that aesthetic continuity, I would agree, is not a goal in itself, but rather I would say aesthetic diversity is what we're looking for today. And also in reference to history, I would say that only having Stockhausen as a reference point has been wrong for a long time. And there's many things that we maybe don't even know about regarding to historic artists that have been rediscovered. If you just think of the whole diversity issue and gender-related artists, and or the radiophonic workshop, how are connections there? What was really their influence in the electronic world, and so on and so on. So in that sense, it's more about opening up. And then still, of course, I see that problem. Where do you start? What do you teach? Just more, even, of the older works. And I think that not even technologically related. And I think it always has to be a balance of something that we know that we can all reference on, and other things that you put into the history of electronic music. And I think that regarding technology, I think that, like it has been said, this idea of maybe even sharing experts. We have now with the Corona situation, we have the situation that we can do online workshops in certain levels. And then years ago, we had the question, what do the big studios serve for anyway, now that there's so much accessibility to technology in a more broader sense? And maybe that could be one role of certain studios to take one of these new technologies and be sort of in charge of them, and then distribute that knowledge to people who want to deal with it, and students. And I really think it has always been hard to really be an expert on all the fields of electronic music, and it's just getting harder, because it's just so diversified now what we can do technologically. And one last thing, sorry, I also think that in dealing with the older technologies maybe is important too, and can be very enriching. But I think also very important is just to listen. I mean, to receive these works even as artworks, which could be just a recording of the Stockhausen piece and not a recreation of his spatial setups and so on. And this can go on also for other works, because that's another problem that we have. How do we actually keep the old technologies working? And it probably is not really solvable. So we have to deal with the recordings and that's what we have, and then learn to listen to those and to analyze them more on an aesthetic level and not so much on a technological level also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one question would remain. Let me be provocant a little bit. Do the students, do they really want old, experienced experts? Yeah, Rebecca.
I would say absolutely. As a student, I mean, as I mentioned in the last panel, that's actually been my biggest problem studying at an otherwise quite renowned program, is that there is no instruction in the traditional sense from experts, as it were. There is rather the goal of the programs that I've experienced has been students go off and do what you want, and I'll sign off on some forms and, let your mind run free. And, I believe too much freedom is actually not that productive. And so there needs to be not hand-holding. However, there does need to be guidance for students in specific fields. So whatever that means might be school specific. For example, some institutions specialize in different fields in the realm of sound, and that's perfectly fine. But if I'm going to be doing work at one of those programs, I want those experts to teach me things. And then another comment that I had was as pertains to this question of aesthetic diversity, because that's extremely important. At the same time, the push that I've seen recently towards aesthetic diversity has been so topical in a way that's kind of tokenizing and offensive, actually. So in a lot of academic programs, I see this push to, talk about women in electronic music more. But a lot of times the study isn't, as Kirsten was saying, it's we're not really looking at the works as we're not investigating them aesthetically. Rather, we're incorporating them kind of in this haphazard way into curricula simply because it's women making this artwork, for example. And we don't discuss the work on its aesthetic or technological merits. Rather, we really discuss it from this perspective of like identity politics, which can feel very tokenizing. So that's another thing that I think needs to be discussed as we work to incorporate new voices and paradigms, namely to make sure that we're incorporating these new voices on the basis of merit, or we're talking about the merits of the work rather than simply the fact that the work we're looking at is aesthetically diverse or what have you.
Mm-hmm. Christoph, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thanks. That also belongs to what Rebecca said, but also what Stefan and Kirsten said. So one thing to react to that from a teaching perspective is also, as Stefan pointed it out, to change the teaching archetype. So not being the older expert, as you also said, Ludger, but just being someone who shares experiences with the others and guides students to fulfill their ideas or their aesthetic goals. So this is one aspect, I think. Another could be teaching rather concepts than tools, to have more fundamental knowledge, which is more lasting. But yes, also with regard to concepts, things are changing for sure. And yeah, inviting experts and to having some kind of centers that concentrate on certain topics and then sharing each other is a nice idea. Would appreciate but on the other hand, I see some problem with regard to being as one institution to have to focus on a certain topic, then to be able to share also this with and to gain a certain level of expertise in one particular field, and then students come up with different ideas, other ideas, and you always want to invite them too. And so this is a question of how to deal with it. You can say we have centers for different topics and the students have to approach this or that in order to what they want to do, but they also might to do different things around in the course of their studies. So there have also to be some kind of diversity within an institution. So how to balance this out, to have centers and expertise at certain points which are able to reach a certain level and to spread this knowledge, but also to have diversity at every institution.
I think there is at least, Kirsten.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that actually the part or the counterpart of diversity is actually specificity, meaning that it's not about being diverse a little bit everywhere, but then to it also comes back to this idea of not tokenizing, but to actually trying to interpret a work and a work frame and a technological world within a certain work or an aesthetic world. So that means that you should try to be conscious of diversity, but at the same time, go into certain topics, be specific, or even go into certain older technologies and really recreate them, or learn an old programming language or just something where you really, and I think from that, then again, you learn for new technologies. So that it's not like you just given a general overview and it all stays on the surface in a way, but that you really try to also concentrate and go into the deep in certain areas. And that's a bit the question, what areas should that may be? Yeah. And that probably always does have to do also with the teacher's teaching, because that was one thing that I always thought very fascinating with the next generation meetings, that everyone, of course, every teacher would say, I try not to push my students in any direction. But there was, even for the studios, there was something that was so, you could really see a certain language developed at a certain studio. And I think it's more important that we actually also just take that into account, that it is like that. And also with the young and old teachers, I think that I would say even, I think the idea of learning with students is really true today. It has to be, because there's just so much new stuff. But on the other hand, you can also say, this was different when I was your age, but I think that it can be a viewpoint that you really say, this is something where I have to say I have a difficulty with this, or I ask myself how you receive works if it's always little tidbits of 2 minutes and surfing and so on, blah, 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 and to really go into a very honest discussion about this. And in a sense, maybe that's also how teaching used to be done, that, you had the older professor there talking from his stamina and world of his knowledge. But it was also very specific. And I think people can bounce off of that, and it can be a sort of honest dealing with this situation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kirsten. Claudia, you want to say?
Yeah, thank you. This conversation is going in very interesting directions. And I would like to maybe follow this line that you were talking about, Kirsten, and also a bit all the others about this. This idea of having, I don't know, I have a feeling, this is a general thing, that we are in this thinking idealistically. So like a studio should provide all the tools that the student needs to become a fully fledged, formed composer of electronic music. My experience is that most of my work was because I was curious, and I met on the other side someone who could somehow support this curiosity, discreetly maybe sometimes less, sometimes more, but in any case, it originated from a need, an expressive need, of course, as a composer. I'm sure many of you have experienced this personally, but what I would like to stress is there's a lot of alone work in generally in composition, but mostly also in electronic music. There's a lot of online communities, forums. So I think in general, okay, yeah, when you have a very ambitious project in mind as a student, it would be great if you had on the other side someone who could really technically, sustain and support the whole process, and maybe make things a bit faster, yeah, find an easier way to find solutions and so forth. But I'm not sure this should be the main role, educationally speaking, of electronic music studios. I'm not sure I have a full answer, but my feeling in general is, as a composer and yeah, eventually also student and teacher, maybe the best thing is, okay, try, as many of you already have said, try to provide the tools to allow the student to attain her own freedom. Technically speaking, then they can choose their poison, yeah. To each of us our own, may it be one or another software, one or another media. Then, at that point, it takes time to develop your own tools. Yeah.
So if I may summarize, what you said so far is that the dialogue between student and teacher is a very valuable form of interaction, that the technology, the continuation of or discontinued disruption of technology has probably not the most important aspect in it. It is, of course, appreciated by the students to be updated by current developments, but it is the focus is not on only the new aspects. And there is one thing I would like to point to ask you what you think about. There is one thing which is really very continuous, and that is our perception. And I think no other subject or topic in a school of music is so much dealing with the extremes of perception than the technological driven or based music is. And it's not a, I wouldn't say it's a cognitive perception. It's as well, it's a psychoacoustic, a very, let's say, basic perception, because with the speaker, we have a tool which is able to do any extreme. And isn't that an aspect where we say, okay, this is our base for all of our students, studios, for all of our topics, and we can articulate this base in different fields. Yeah, Rebecca. It's Christoph after that.
I think that's kind of a nebulous thing to say. I mean, that's kind of like saying the basis of writing is paper. So there does need to be, I think, more, as previously mentioned, specificity. And to kind of follow up on what Claudia said, as also a student and one-time teacher, I do feel like probably, yeah, like in the most, that probably the best that many institutions can do is just provide students with necessary resources, or the resources that they want, or do the best that they possibly can to give students those resources. At the same time, if there's a reason why the sort of close mentorship of the professor-student relationship has been around for centuries and held up as a paradigm for centuries. It's because it works. And if joining an institution, an art institution, if that mentorship isn't there, right, then what is a degree or a credential from an art institution except for a credential? Like, if I might as well not even be at KHM if I'm not receiving close guidance from my professors, because I can learn everything online, right? So we're in this world where everything is accessible on Reddit, on YouTube, on Cadence, all these free online courses. I mean, if I want, I can literally get access to the course materials from numerous MIT, the best tech school in the world, classes. So there has to be something different about the university. And I think it can't just be providing resources, because actually the resources are there. And if I really want access to a certain technology, well, I can rent it, or I can apply from a grant from an outside institution. So why am I at an art school anyway? And that is to receive this sort of close one-on-one mentorship. And of course, the problem, like at the end of the day, is what I want to do is something really specific, and there might not be an instructor who can speak to that, and that's probably the kern of the problem. But that's my thought.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, may I immediately reply? I'm sorry, Christoph, if I'm interrupting, but just because I felt like it was, of course, I totally agree with this idea. A student doesn't have to do all the work on its own. Clearly, the mentorship is important, and for me, it has been very valuable, and I see how valuable it can be also being on the other side. And what I was being more specific, my observation was more specific in the specific case where you don't have as a teacher, those that knowledge, that background, then you can find ways to address the student in the direction where he can look. And that's like kind of what was, but for the rest, of course, individual mentorship is very, and also peer. I think peer sharing knowledge, learning. Yes.
Just to quickly say something before I, of course, let some other people speak is, I'm surprised that peer mentorship wasn't mentioned in the last discussion because it's so important. And that's why I've been so skeptical about Zoom classes and remote learning because, as a student in the past year, I've really been separated from my peers. In fact, it was illegal for me to even collaborate with them. And that was really to the detriment of my education this year. And I do hope that there is pushback as we slowly but surely move out of the worst of the pandemic, pushback against actually of course, there are a lot of great things about online courses, but I hope wherever it's possible, we move toward in-person peer-to-peer, back towards in-person peer-to-peer collaboration, because a lot of times when the professor can't necessarily provide something for the student, oftentimes there's a student who you can work with who can help you and enrich your work in that way.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Christoph.
Yeah, thanks. I also agree absolutely with what Rebecca and Claudia said. And I would like to link that to what you were asking, Ludger, with regard to having our ways of perception as some kind of a basis. I think we should not limit the realm of electroacoustic music to just the ears, having all these embodied concepts in mind. And also with regard to hearing, I always really appreciate when our students work together with instrumentalists, which is possible at a University of Music, which is also this kind of peer-to-peer thing, which is always impossible because I totally agree, Ludger, that they don't have this whole spectrum of diverse sounds, but they're really sensitive with regard to fine-grained sound with their instrument, which is really a high level of expertise. And the other is high level of expertise with regard to expression, expressive movements, expression of sounds, which is something different and more direct than thinking in processes and algorithms and things like this, which I also appreciate. And bring those types together to learn from each other, a really important thing also on this perceptual level. And this is really, really important, I think, as some kind of a basis, this type of interaction, any type of peer-to-peer interaction is really, which is our fundament.
Next one would be Kirsten. And then Stefan.
Yeah, I think that regarding, again, the role of the teacher or mentor, I think one thing that maybe one could establish would be to say that there's a certain necessity to also give an overview, and more in the sense of being as conscious as possible about what is actually going on. For example, regarding AI, then to listen to the artists working with that now and try to derive a certain position on this aesthetically, and to discuss this maybe on the backdraw of historic examples, which can always be done. You can always hear new developments and discuss them in the field of, has this been done before? What's different actually now using a new technology? Because that, I think, is one of the most interesting questions that we face. How do tools shape what we do? How do we interact with the tools on this aesthetic level? And I think that you can derive these questions, and you need a certain, sort of experience also in the end. And this is also, I think it's actually a listening experience. It's somewhere all this listening to concerts that, someone has been doing all their life has to be somewhere, hopefully. And some of that can be maybe shared or just opened up to discussion with people who are younger. So just to say something actually explicit about what this mentor is, what role that would be and could be. And I think the pandemic discussion is very good because it's quite exemplary in that field, that there you had a situation which was new to everyone. And, the form of guidance. It was pretty weird. In Berlin, we were suddenly called systemrelevant as teachers. And I thought, it's a bit, compared to the nurses and doctors and so on. But then I thought about it and I thought, okay, I have so and so many people that I'm actually discussing these things with. And even in the online forum, offering just a forum to discuss this. And I thought it made sense. And also things like, what are you allowed to do? What are you not allowed to do? At the University of the Arts, we had quite a good discussion amongst teachers all over the disciplines, which actually happened only because of this pandemic situation. And then there was also the final presentation is usually on a weekend in the summer. And the president also fought for that it would be acknowledged as a demonstration. So that meant that we did have something physically going on, and we did it all outside. And for example, all the pieces that happened virtually in my seminar, we just took them outside, played them in front of the university building, made a little, tiny acoustic setting, playing against the walls of the university. And it was really, kind of, wow, this is physical sound effect, and things like that, where I think you just need maybe also the experience to say, no, we're going to do it against laws and stuff. This is what's responsible. This is what we should do. This is what you should do, to give this kind of energy also sometimes. Maybe it's just an energy transfer to teach at the right moment, So that's just a more general thing. And I think also, Ludger, that perception, yes, maybe it's the basis in the paper. But at the same time, I also think more and more somehow that it's still the most, in a way, even the most underestimated aspect of our field or of the field of media in general, that people tend to forget that we actually do in the end hear not from our computer speakers, but we're hearing the computer speakers on a certain model of computer, and we're hearing it in a certain room, and someone else is in the other room doing something else. And this is all a context of perception. And I think it all plays into how we actually, what sound and music means in the end. And so, and even on a very purely acoustic level, because I've been doing so much outside, I mean, it's just a wonder what happens acoustically outside, which is sort of never ending. And it has a lot to do with perception and acoustic worlds and so on. So I do think it is very important.
Thank you, Kirsten. And Stefan? Next.
Yes. I wanted to also relate to this issue of perception. Ludger, as you mentioned that this was perhaps the only thing that is continuous, but I would like to question that a little bit too, because, for example, I think the way we use our perception in an AR or a VR situation is quite uncharted territory. It's something that's really also even medically, I mean, a lot of people get dizzy in VR situations. So that's all, these kind of things are all quite in flux still. So for sure, our perception of hearing is something perhaps like a baseline that runs through everything. But then in general, due to all these new technologies, are the ways that we perceive realities, whatever that reality is also changing a lot. So I just wanted to
thank you, Stefan. I just want to say, I think it's you brought a very wide catalog of aspects of perception, for example. And of course, I agree with Stefan that perception is changing. We are learning, we are changing our perception. I think people 200 years ago had a different reality, acoustic reality than we have today. So we changed to a different way how we perceive and what is what is too many information today is different than 200 years ago, I would say. As well, but what I found that is that even for myself, understanding how we do perceive even basic things is our tool, is our main tool, and it's not so general like saying, oh yeah, that's how the ear works. No, psychoacoustic is, I think, has a lot more potential because there are really complex aspects of this, the way how we perceive. For example, as a stupid example, we hear a sound, and then the direct sound gives us the direction of the sound, and then we hear all the reflections, and we don't hear the directions of all the reflections. Why don't we hear them? Because they are too very close to the original. So our ear evaluates certain signals directional and other signals which are close to them non-directional. This is something no one knows, and it's so interesting how these mechanisms in the brain works. That's the reason I wanted to say that perception is not so simple. It's really very, very complicated and interesting what our brain does. And it is at least physically, or part of it, the non-cognitive perception is our tool, which not so much changes. The cognitive perception, which adapts to our situation, is of course changing. And I think this is a commonplace. It's at least a commonplace for us all, for all the aesthetic concepts and in the history and in the new situation. But I want to come back to this situation. When I was studying, electronic music was, after the Second World War, roughly, let's say, 35 years old. Today, electronic music is 75-year old. What a difference! It's a double. I mean, now it doubled its existence. It's it's incredible. It's a completely different situation now. And these 35 years were in a rather, there was a progressive evolution, but it is there was an agreement of avant-garde, for example. In these 35 years, avant-garde, the concept of avant-garde was agreed on. Today, this concept does not exist anymore. And you spoke about diversity. You spoke about accumulating different aesthetics which have a similar value. We don't have this hierarchy of aesthetics. This one is a good one, and the artsy one. This one is a pop one that's of minor quality. We have a completely different concept of diversity today than we have 30 or 40 years ago, which was 40 years ago. There was, of course, as well a kind of high art, low art idea. But my main question is, what do you, as teachers or students, how do we deal with these values of aesthetics? Is there anything we should give? Because we could say something is complex, something is simple without any connotation, but we could as well say complex is good and the simple is bad. So Christoph said you want to say something.
Yeah, I think one key issue is we always have to contextualize it. I just had the impression in the seminar just before our recording started, which is about the concept of artistic research and how computer music is some kind of artistic research of una lettre, and we were talking about John Chowning and we were listening to Renas. And surprisingly or not, by the discussion there came up the meaning that those moving sounds from nowadays should sound like a little bit cheesy. Also, no one would do this anymore in like this to move around some sounds. And then we can contextualize and can see why had this happened to a certain time and what is the context. So before then again Stockhausen comes up, and so when gets the place of a sound gets a parameter for composing and what techniques are used and how it is done today. And so this is one aspect of contextualize it with regard to history, what also Kirsten suggested, which is always important. But you could also contextualize it with things that are happening in parallel. And then you get an idea of how those aesthetic values are shaped, or what are the factors of, or the parameters of establishing aesthetic values. And then you can maybe get an idea and empower all the students to reflect on aesthetic values. If you have different sets or subsets of aesthetic values in different contexts, put next to each other, and to get out how it comes to that, rather than putting a canon which is always there. This is historical concept, which is always important, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, you know, we say that there is such big diversity in terms of, you know, developments and technological technologies, and also, of course, these different music, call them genres, that we now sort of see equally. But on the other hand, I'm also wondering whether this is really more diverse, or if it really is so much more than it used to be, or if we only took certain things from history that we know of now, but it was actually as diverse then as it is now. Because sometimes you can also look at stuff that's going on now and say, one thing sounds a bit like the other. You know, it's actually not so different. It's the same thing that when everyone started to put pictures up on the social media of themselves, and suddenly, you know, it's totally, if you look at it from the outside, it just looks like the whole world is just looking at their smartphones and something like that. You know, that it's not as, what people are doing is actually maybe not even as diverse as it seems, or just as diverse. So it's a very hard, I think, to actually put numbers on that. And also, I think that I think what you said about complexity, I would say is good. But the question is really, what is complexity? Complexity does not necessarily mean that it's some, you know, complicated algorithm or something like that, or a huge, expensive technological setup, but that it takes into account new ideas that, you know, for example, I think one thing that's always strikes me is Alvin Lucier, because whenever you come up with some kind of topic and you look at, you know, the historic works, it's always Alvin Lucier who had one of the first experiments in this field. And they are sort of simple, but they are really going into the depth of the aesthetic questions connected to it, you know, be it solar, works with solar power, or works with, of course, the sensors and so on. So, and feedback and all that. So that's really quite interesting. And then you have to say maybe that the complexity lies in other factors. And I would say if something's too simple, but more in the terms of, you know, ecological diversity, which is also not, it's a complexity, you know, it's not simple. They are all highly evolutionized beings, and to a totally specific again. And I think that it should be what we should be looking for. I think you could, because I'm trying to, sorry, one last sentence. I'm trying to say something affirmative, you know, to say, okay, complexity is good.
I wanted to go back to something Christoph said about the Turenas, the comment of your students, which made me a bit smile and laugh also, because of course, I mean, it's a dated piece, but this comment about who specializes, who moves sound around like this, I'm not sure I would 100% agree with this, because not only space is a very hot topic, I find, in electronic music still today, how to spatialize. Of course, there are more or less, how do you say, credible, convincing ways to do it. Yeah, but I find that it's a field that raises a lot. It's a field. It's a way of. It's something you can address in composing that raises a lot of questions, a lot of interesting research and results. And still today, there's different electronic studios. If you go to Graz, you will have to deal with a certain kind of a specific idea of how specialization is dealt with. If you go to IRCAM, well, they have a bit more variety in that. But according to where you go, and of course ZKM has a very important tradition about it, and so forth. But I find that if you see something like Turenas, like you said, in a context, okay, yes, but not only in the context, but what can it teach us today? What can we preserve of that today? And this is something like what is telling us today we have forgotten, maybe. Because sometimes we rediscover technologies. It's like we've seen that in like wide histories, like probably, they had discovered the wheel, I don't know, in 10,000 times in history. But when does it stay in the as part of the human knowledge? This is another thing. So this is something I want to a bit somehow bring back into question. Like this comment about something because it sounds vintage, then or old or dated. It's who does that? Well, it's how you do it also.
Thank you for that. To clarify that point, I think also when you contextualize it, you can also re-evaluate it. It's not making it less convincing and say, oh, it's old-fashioned. That's not the point. It's contextualizing it and re-evaluate it. What can we learn out of it for now? So it's a really important point. Yeah, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, and then one last, sorry, and then I will try to be very, very short about this idea, this question of complexity and simplicity that also Kirsten brought into the table. I think, it's kind of another, I use this word quite often. I've used it also in the other panel, but it's a phantom. I think it's not a matter of like anything can be perceived both ways. If you see the details of it, maybe something that sounds very simple to attain that simplicity has very complex engineering behind it. I don't know, just to say an example, or vice versa. Something that sounds very complex in the end is just messy and I don't know, not clear and what maybe the composer wanted. So in the end, that complexity mirrors unclarity and not maybe how do you say, an actual complexity of thinking. So it's always, it's a double blade how do you say, label we can give to something. And sometimes I find, at least for me, my experience was every time I met a composer or a piece of music that for me I perceived as something very clear, the more I went into it, the more I looked at it, the more I perceived, wow, there's so much work in it, so much care for detail, little things to obtain that apparent simplicity. So it's always very tricky, and I find like sometimes their works, we all know this is a very famous case, of course, but I'm using this Stockhausen again mantra. It uses one technique, we all know, ring modulation, and yet it goes through all over the piece, also in the instrumental writing. It's consistent, it's one technique, and yet yet what a complex thought behind it. Yeah.
Thank you. Since time is nearly out, I want to stimulate with a last provocation and want from each of you one answer. You said, I want to refer what Claudia was mentioning before, or Kirsten as well mentioned that a lot of old stuff has to be re-evaluated. And if I use, for example, live coding is a good example, a new tool, a new technology, but of course it's algorithmic composition, it's improvisation, it's hardware, it's modulation technology. So it incorporates many disciplines only inside a different way of presentation. It's live electronics basically somehow. So this would be my question. Would it be? Would you say, okay, then let's use live electronic and that incorporates everything? And my question to you is, what is for you the most important thing for you personal, as a student, as a teacher, as a head of a student, the most interesting? Let's say not the most important, but the most interesting thing you want to bring to the students.
I mean, well, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but funnily enough, right, over the course of this discussion, everyone kept coming back to Stockhausen, mentioning Stockhausen pieces. And I guess this really does go to show that there is a sort of diversity, be it historical, aesthetic, technological, or otherwise, that is lacking. Which is why I think, for me personally, because you did ask a personal question, right? What I try to bring and what I would like to see more of in the sort of academic electronic music world is a focus on almost said a swear word, on things that actually sound good. So, I like to, in my pieces, I compose using Ableton, so I bring in melody and I bring in stuff from kind of more traditional club music, but I try to install it in a way that's interesting. Or I try to use a technique to create the sounds that's interesting, whether that be like the usage of Super Collider or whatever. But to me, at the end of the day, a piece of music has to sound good. It has to be listenable. And I think what is important to me, what I would like to see more of, is less focus on the zany and experimental, because it is academic for its own sake, and more focus on that which can bring us to new places, which is earnestly good and earnestly listenable. And I think that is lacking. And I think the fact that we some people may love how Stockhausen sounds, but I think a lot of his gravitas does not come from the beauty of his music. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Who wants to comment? Stefan.
Yes. Well, I did not mention Stockhausen, and I did that very consciously.
My fault, I know.
It's funny, of course. I mean, I'm Belgian, and I live in Germany for a while now, and I teach in a German Musicology, and I have a lot of German friends and composer friends, and I see how much this dude is revered. Of course, an amazing artist, but it's also very localized. I mean, his name is definitely everywhere in the world, an important name, but it's also really a German thing. Even more so, I have experienced that. And in any case, in my teaching, of course, it's impossible not to mention him, but I'm also really careful not to iconize him so much, as has happened actually, funnily enough, in our past 66 minutes of talking. Yeah, I just wanted to, as a little side note, mention that it's also a very geographic thing, that or not very, but partly geographic thing that that name appears so often. It's been a very different experience for me in the US, for example, or in Belgium. And yeah, also just wanted to mention that I think it's important. I think also Kirsten mentioned that when we were talking about diversity, that we go back to other models than Stockhausen as well. But I know we all agree on that. Then Ludger, to answer your question, or try to answer your deliciously provocative question, I'll perhaps try to answer it in a similar way. What I would like to offer my students, or what I want them, my dream is that I can somehow.
Okay, I'm not sure if you got the last word. You said, my dream is that I can somehow.
Oh, wow. That must have been a very dramatic.
Okay. The most interesting. To make them think wild. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So we have beautiful music should be beautiful. Then we should not iconize music. Music can or should provoke. And Christoph and Claudia is the next one. Okay.
It's an important heritage now. That's why I wanted to immediately speak, just to take off my chest. What I think is relevant is for me would be, yeah, of course, like Stefan said, we all agree that we need also to give voice to those less known figures. That has nothing to do with the gender, the nationality. I think in general, aesthetically also speaking, or just composers who have been less, I would say, mainstream, you know, less mainstream, because we all know how these logics are never really necessarily don't resemble what is actually, yeah, the richness of certain, I don't know, just to mention Van Gogh. Okay, we all know how that life unfolded, artistically speaking. So then, fortunately, we were able to rediscover his work. But that said, I think as a human being who is right now very much immersed into technology in general, and where I see more and more for these younger generations, we see that for them it's for granted, while for us we all transition somehow towards these machines interaction with human. It was something that was not really available to the common user when I was younger. And so to answer to your provocation, I would bring another provocation, which would be bring back the center to the human being. So somehow find a way so that we do not become too much victim of the technology, but to provide the tools to the students to leave their imagination a bit outside the medium itself, and then go back to it in a way that the medium just becomes one of the possible means, and not just something that determines their own choices. I don't know if this is clear, but somehow I find more and more this tendency that the technological tool I'm using, or the software I'm using being a user, a general user, determines the choices I'm able to make. And this is something that is very dangerous. I find the composer should not feel that the machine is imposing the choices. but it's you as a composer who has the choices, and then you go to the machine, and then you will find a way to make that possible. And this is something really I cannot stress enough about. I think it's very important thing at stake today.
Thank you, Claudia. And next is Kirsten.
Yeah, it connects pretty well but I would actually even maybe say it in a more positive note, because I was going to say microphone should be again and more is the center somehow, microphone and of course the speaker. But this actually connects to two aspects. One is that I'm trying to teach an awareness also for tool diversity, that every tool makes us work in a different way. And so every tool is also neither good nor bad. It just is a way of interacting with it. And in that sense, also microphones can be very varied, but even more, and the other thing is this listening aspect, which I also mentioned earlier. And I think that a microphone is also an example for that, because it shows how we interact with technology, even with a microphone, where we interact with media, that it is, the machine is also alive. It's not a machine. It's something where we put the making of the machine in, and it reacts differently to our inputs. And this whole relationship is constantly interesting and fascinating, and can be still positively explored. And maybe the microphone and also the way it enhances our sense of listening and perceiving the world is a good example for it, and also stands for many pieces that have been done with the microphone, obviously. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Kirsten. And Christoph?
Yeah, thanks. I also follow your thoughts. And I would try to teach the students to have to reflect on all resources and paradigms they use. Maybe also up to the point that questioning using computers in doing computer music. So can we do computer music also without computers? Thinking like aspects of this one. And maybe triggered by, since you mentioned live coding, because I always think one critical aspect there is, that the body is not so much present. There's not so the potential of being expressive. So, and this is another aspect to teach students to use any resource they want to use to be expressive, and to use that to be expressive. Maybe also learn from instrumentalists, as I mentioned before. This could be one answer to your question. Thank you for that.
So let me summarize. Stefan said something like music should provoke. It's not complete, it's just how I understood. Rebecca said music may sound beautiful. Rebecca had to leave because of another thing she had to do. Claudia said, find unknown voices, bring back a human being, bring back the human being into the music or into the in front of the machine. Kirsten said, see and use technology in a big diversity, in parentheses, microphone. And Christoph says, use all resources and paradigms. So, Stefan, no, okay, exceptionally, you can add something.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Music should provoke was not exactly what I meant, although I'm not against provocative music. What I meant literally was that I want the students to be able to think wildly. So really to think out of the box, to think it involves many things. It involves having perspective, having context, being creative, being anarchistic a little bit, etc. But so I just packaged this with this one phrase, thinking wildly.
Think wildly. Okay, thank you for this addition. And thank you all for the discussion. It was very interesting. And I think especially here in the last minutes, we found out that there are many things to to be aware of and to. I shouldn't say we all didn't think about those things, but there are still many things of our responsibility where we have to still work on and re-evaluate ourselves in how and why we work with the students, how and why we work with technology, how and why we work with disruptions, with the modification of technologies, and how and why we work with history and our perception. Thank you for your participation, and I hope I did not refer to one of your thoughts in a completely wrong way.
Thank you.
Many thanks, Ludger, for the invitation.
Thanks for this
Thank you,
discussion.
everyone.
Thanks to all.
Let me thank the panelists for the exciting discussion we just had. But now let's come to the main part of the program, which is the student works. We will have 8 studios presenting their works. And let me mention these studios with their German name. Studio für Elektroakustische Musik Weimar, Hochschule für Musik Dresden, Seibert Music Lab, Hochschule für Musik, Theater und Tanz Frankfurt am Main, UNI.K Studio für Elektroakustische Komposition, Klangkunst und Klangforschung der Universität der Künste Berlin, Institute of Sonology Den Haag, Hochschule für Musik Karlsruhe, Institut für Computermusik und Sound Technology der Zürcher Hochschule der Künste und schließlich die Kunsthochschule für Medien Köln. I wish you will have an exciting program now, but before I leave, let me invite you to the next year's real meeting, Next Generation Festival in Karlsruhe. I hope all of you will come to Karlsruhe, enjoy the exciting time we all will have in presenting your music and discussing with each other. So stay tuned for next year's June and have a good concert now.
Einen wunderschönen guten Tag zusammen. Mein Name ist Maximilian Markoll und es ist mir eine Ehre und große Freude, in meiner noch sehr, sehr frischen Funktion als Professor für elektroakustische Kompositionen und Klangkunst in aller Kürze das SEAM in Weimar vorstellen zu dürfen. Das SEAM ist eine Kooperation zwischen der Hochschule für Musik Franz Liszt und der Bauhaus-Universität in Weimar. An der Hochschule für Musik betreuen wir Studierende der Bachelor- und Masterstudiengänge Elektroakustische Kompositionen. Und an der Bauhaus-Universität sind wir in der Fakultät Kunst und Gestaltung untergebracht und betreuen Studierende in der Fachrichtung Medienkunst und Mediengestaltung. Wir sind auch räumlich am Saum. Wir sind einerseits im Fürstenhaus der Hochschule für Musik untergebracht, wo wir uns auch jetzt gerade befinden, nämlich im Produktionsstudio, in dem mehrkanalig gearbeitet werden kann. Und nebenan haben wir noch ein kleines Studio, in dem zum Beispiel Aufnahmen gemacht oder auch flexiblere Setups aufgebaut werden können. Es gibt dann in einem Gebäude der Bauhaus-Universität, in der Q3-Straße, gibt es, je nachdem wie man zählt, 2, 3 weitere Studios. Ein Arbeitsstudio, was sich momentan im Umbau befindet, ein White Cube, in dem Klanginstallationen aufgebaut und ausprobiert werden können, und unser Werkstattstudio, das permanent unser Lautsprecherorchester beheimatet und wo auch unsere Konzerte stattfinden. Natürlich kooperieren wir auch in beiden Institutionen. Einerseits verbindet uns eine enge Zusammenarbeit mit der Klasse für instrumentale Komposition an der Hochschule für Musik und auch mit den Instrumentalklassen natürlich. Andererseits in der Bauhaus-Universität zum Beispiel mit dem experimentellen Radio oder dem Interface-Design oder auch der freien Kunst. Unser Ziel ist natürlich, dass sich diese Diversität im Angebot auch in den Arbeiten der Studierenden niederschlägt. Und nun freue ich mich sehr, Ihnen eine kleine Kostprobe von Arbeiten aus dem SEAM präsentieren zu dürfen.
Ça va chez les retards. My name is Giulia Francavilla and I am a second-year master's student at the Institute of Sonology. My research concerns immersive experience, both investigated through sound making and algorithmic composition and through researching on the activity of listening. I am presenting an excerpt of a live coding performance. In the performance, I use a self-made algorithmic system implemented in SuperCollider. Within the system, I use recorded wind as the main source of behavior. Wind is analyzed in real time, producing control data that I use to shape and modulate sound, which is made with synthetic sound generators. Having this live coding approach combined with an external source of behavior allows me to investigate a fundamental relationship between a human, machine, and environment.
My name is Farzana Nouri, and I'm a sonology student at the Royal Conservatory of The Hague. Pleiotropic oscillation is a piece from a series of works from my ongoing research project on composing with genetic algorithms and evolutionary computation. Genetic algorithms provide means of optimization by generating more promising ideas from a specifiable set of components, which then evolve under a simulation of a process of natural selection. My research project focuses mainly on using this genetic evolution process as the structure of the composition. In this particular piece, the extracted data from the genetic algorithm is controlling parameters of the synth. And finally, multiple layers of these evolving sound objects are combined to create complex and emergent sonic textures.
My name is Michalis. My background is in architecture, but somewhere along the course my interests shifted towards creating objects for exploring new sounds and performing live music. The particular object I'm showing here is called the lirai, and it's an electromagnetic stringed instrument. It works by imposing a set of electromagnetic forces on a set of strings. And so the generation of sound is coming from the strings themselves, but the generation of the movement of the instrument is coming from electronics. So in this way, it's a hybrid between electronic and stringed instruments. This instrument is created for long durational performances. What you see here is an excerpt of just 4 minutes from a 20-minute long performance. The instrument is made for drone music, which means a stretching out of time. And so in the future, I want to use it to play 30 minutes, 1 hour, even 2 hour long performances.
So this was the final and last concert of this year's Next Generation 8.5 or NET generation, as we called it. We have heard 91 musical works in these 3 days. We had 3 panel discussions, and there were 24 studios participating, as well as 150 students. This is such an impressive number. I'm so happy to go through all this, to experience all this artistic creativity and this musical research, musical findings, and your curiosity in artistic creation. We had studios from the countries of Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the Netherlands, Italy, and France. That's quite a rather European scope. And especially I want to thank again all the students, all the teachers who take the effort to participate in Next Generation 8.5, and to our staff, especially Dominik Kautz for the coordination, project coordination, as well as Yannick Hoffmann for the moderation, and finally the video studio of the ZKM, who did the recordings, the cuttings, the editings, and the broadcast. I wish to see you all again in person in next year's 2022 version of Next Generation in real life, and probably without broadcast, but I'm sure that will be an exciting time, and thank you again all for your great participation. Bye-bye.